But Amy Madson is the director of Children and Family Ministries at Messiah Church, but she's also a licensed marriage and family therapist, AAMFT, approved clinical supervisor, and the director of Children and Family Ministry at Messiah Church. Before coming to Messiah, she worked as a therapist in a variety of settings that served tweens and teens, including residential treatment, educational settings, and private practice. She greatly values making safe spaces for tweens, teens, and their families to talk openly about mental health. She loves being creative, spending time outside, and raising her 3 children. So we've just got a little introductory video from a company called Child Link, maybe that's what they're called. And they just have this great piece to kind of talk about what we're talking about as a starting point for us.
Are more well known than others, such as excitement or we're all different, and there are many different feelings we can experience at different times. Some are more well known than others, such as excitement or anger, but some can be harder to understand, like anxiety. Millions of years ago, we relied on anxiety to keep us out of harm's way. At the slightest sign of danger, our bodies would bring on this uneasy, urgent feeling to jolt us into action or get us to run away. These days, our bodies still try to protect us, but life's evolved. There are loads more things to worry about, and they have a habit of piling up without us noticing. Anxiety can feel like all kinds of things. That twisted, shaky feeling in your stomach, or the strange nervousness that makes you want to hide away from the world. It can make you tired, frustrated, and upset. Anxiety can start as a simple worry, but grow into a panic and convince you that you're losing it altogether. It can make you scared, restless, speed up your heart, but give you no explanations as to why it's happening. It might not feel like it, but anxiety is completely natural and can affect anybody for all kinds of reasons, like exam stress, family troubles, new places, or a mixture of things. It can even come for no apparent reason, but the good news is that you can reduce it, and the first step is to talk about it. Talking about how you feel is a great way to feel better. You don't have to face things alone. So if you ever want to get stuff off your chest, then you can contact Childline. They're there to listen.
So one thing that I really like about that video, there's 2 things about it I really like, especially as a parent, but also as a therapist. And is there an echo for people, or is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay. The first is how differently everybody experiences anxiety. And so I think there can be a temptation to um, name anxiety from the outside, but I think approaching anxiety in a conversation with loved ones who are teens and tweens, not naming it for them, but helping them to explore their own experiences and whether or not it's anxiety can be really empowering, and also take away some of that defensiveness that tweens and teens can have around things like, I think you're experiencing anxiety. At the same time, if a teen or tween ever comes to you and says, I'm feeling really anxious, helping them, giving them some tools to express and explore what it is they're experiencing, rather than saying yes, yeah, or no, helping, well, tell me more about it. Tell me why you think it's anxiety. Where do you notice it in your body? What are those, what are your experiences of it, can help, because it can range so much. So that's one thing that I really liked about it. The other thing that I really like about that video is the part where it says that, anxiety does serve a function, but in our life now, there is rarely an anxiety emergency. So when my daughter Ruth when I was pregnant with her, she had a kidney that was like 2 times the size of a normal kidney. So I got to meet someone called a pediatric nephrologist. And this pediatric nephrologist said, one thing I love about my job is there is rarely a kidney emergency. And I sort of feel like that about, anxiety. And that can be a tough thing, right? Like when teens or tweens come, or when you're experiencing it, if you are a teen or tween, it can feel like it's an emergency, because from an evolutionary perspective, and from just us being living creatures, it can feel like an emergency, but rarely is it one. So when it is, if it truly is an emergency and you need to run out of the middle of the street, or you need to rescue something, okay. But if you're having those kinds of sensations, or you're seeing someone having those kinds of sensations, to first go, okay, rarely is there an anxiety emergency. Let's all slow down. Let's take a step back, and let's be curious about it rather than needing to solve it. You're already opening up a lot of possibilities. And we're giving a little bit of space for that evolutionary sort of feeling of panic and anxiety to move through us, so that then we can see more possibilities and be more grounded. We actually cannot use our entire brain when we're feeling anxious. We only use parts of our brain that are designed for survival, and they're not the problem-solving parts of our brain. So if we can calm down first, that can be really useful. The other component of that I'll talk about later is the need, because there is this evolutionary sort of fight or flight, it is really beneficial to do something with that energy, like moving, any kind of exercise is usually really helpful for that. But sometimes bringing yourself down with like a warm bath or something can be just as useful. So those are two of my favorite parts about that video. As we go on to these slides, I like stories and I like conversations. So if there is something specific to the slide, let's just have a conversation right there, and Sammy will ask or share that information with me. But if the question is kind of branches into a different direction, that's great. We'll save that for the Q&A at the end, which can be kind of as long or short as we need to. So one other thing about sort of my approach as a therapist is that I think there's a lot of ways to solve problems. And so and they may not all be, they might even sometimes contradict each other. While there is science involved in mental health treatment, there's also a lot of personalization. And there's a lot of the scientific method where you see, is it working? Is it not working? What do we need to change? And so if I present options that might seem like opposites, that's just because there's a lot of options. And I think when we're helping teens and tweens, or ourselves manage, or if you are a teen or tween, manage that anxiety, it's good to know that there's a lot of options that are just fine. And so trying one, sticking with it for a while, and evaluating if it was useful or not is often a great approach. So we'll move to the next slide. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is such a tricky word, I think, because sometimes we think of anxiety like it can get used really regularly, and people can assume that you know what they mean, right? So for some people, anxiety might mean a panic attack. For some people, it might mean persistent worry, or it might mean a stomach ache. And I think anything that we can do as a society to broaden the concept of what anxiety is, but also maybe pin some of it to the specific criteria of what anxiety is from a mental health diagnosis is really useful, because there's I'm feeling anxious versus I have a clinical diagnosis of anxiety. And depression can be kind of the same that way. I'm feeling depressed, so I'm feeling sad, right? But I have clinical depression. That's different. And so with anxiety, there are a lot of different types of anxiety. And so if someone says, I have anxiety, that's usually it's not a lot of information to go off of, right? Because for some people, anxiety can be related to something specific, like public speaking or COVID or germs or something like that. And for some people, it can be more generalized. And so I'm just feeling anxious. And sometimes people know why, and sometimes people don't. And both of those are okay. So giving space as you're wanting to support a loved one or yourself, giving space, but also maybe things to grasp onto. I'm feeling anxious and I don't know why. Okay, what's that feeling like in your body? How long have you been feeling anxious? What is it valuable for me to know as I'm here helping you? Those are all really good things. So, and then for some people, especially not always, but often, boys, for example, may not have as much vocabulary or awareness around like anxiety. It might just show up as being really irritable. It might show up as stomach problems. It might show up as hives. I know we had someone close to us had a lot of stress going on right now, and they had back spasms that were going on, and my daughter said, whoa, when I feel anxious, I break out into hives. So teaching people too in your life, like what happens when you feel anxious, and I'll get to a slide about relating. And so you can think for yourself maybe for a moment about what happens when you feel anxious, because we all do to different degrees. Um, and so even if we don't personally struggle with anxiety, we can always relate, I think, to what it might feel like to be anxious. And that can be a good relating point, even though you don't want to over relate because you want to hold space for the person who's asking for help. Let's see, now I can't see my entire, there we go. There may also be some thoughts that are just, they may even be irrational, right? Because when we're anxious, what happens in our brain is it kind of is like you put a little flashlight right there. And so the possibilities or the fact checking that's like, oh, really? Does every single other person have this going on and I'm the only person who doesn't? Is that really rational? No, but that's how it can feel when we're anxious like that. And that's why a calming presence can be really useful to help combat that, because it can bring people back to a broader array of possibilities around any kind of thoughts that they might be having that are unhelpful. So rather than saying that thought is wrong, you could say something like, is that thought helpful to you right now? That could be something useful if a person is already getting kind of calmer. Tension could be another manifestation of anxiety, or could result in tension headaches. Difficulties concentrating or having a hard time sleeping. So it can look like a lot of different things, and I think that's a hard part about anxiety. I think it makes it hard sometimes to relate or even maybe believe the person who's struggling with anxiety if it's a different way than you might struggle personally with, or than you might imagine. Wow, that person just looks crabby all the time. Are they really anxious? For some people, yes, being irritable and crabby could be the way that they show up with anxiety. So that's a little bit about anxiety. Now, the way that a therapist would diagnose it is by looking at criteria and help. I think that's on the next slide, looking at what kinds of criteria would a person meet, and how would that anxiety fit a certain diagnosis. And the whole purpose of that is to identify a good treatment plan. So one thing to know about anxiety is sometimes people are just born anxious, and some people are not, and that's your temperament. That's just kind of how you're made. And one kind of bright side of having an anxious temperament, if you know that you do, is that you have an opportunity from an early age to build resilience. And so that's just one thing that can be useful. I think when you're trying to help someone who is anxious, or if you're anxious and you're trying to advocate for yourself who doesn't understand, a mismatch in temperament can be can be tricky, but it can be an opportunity for conversation. So if, for example, there's a parent who doesn't have much experience with anxiety and a child who does, that's just, it's good to kind of name that. You don't even have to name it to each other, but might be a useful conversation depending on your relationship. But for both parent and tween or teen to identify that could be really useful as far as, okay, I know that, my parent may or may not runs differently than me. And so here's where I'm at and here's where I need help. Difficulty adjusting to change can cause anxiety. So if you look, I can share some links at the end, but I really liked what Stanford had to say about COVID. I was, COVID's been with us so long now that I was looking at what is this called? Because I've heard the term tossed around that it's a collective trauma, but Stanford poses, yeah, we're still on what causes anxiety. Stanford poses that it's a collective stressor for sure. And that, depending on what kinds of traumas someone has endured, it may or may not be a collective trauma for a family. But there's a lot of changes going on right now and a lot of grieving going on for tweens and teens in some cases due to COVID, because there are maybe milestones that have been missed, even like birthday parties, maybe just important milestones that have been missed or look different than you expect. And so that could cause some additional anxiety. Also, if we think about changes and all the changes that are happening in a tween's or teen's brain and body, that can be another, like, that's a lot of adjusting going on. And so that age is adjusting internally and also externally. And I would say parents of those ages are also adjusting a lot as far as loosening reins, finding ways to be more of, I really like Michelle Icard, I'll bring her up later, but she's a psychologist and writes a lot of books in this area of parenting teens and tweens. But that, your role as a parent is shifting in the tweens and teens, and just your identity as a parent, if you're in the launching phase, is changing. And so noticing all of that, all of those changes can contribute to some additional anxiety. So anything you can do to kind of, again, expand the possibilities by finding things that can expend energy so that it's not anxious energy, and also bring some calm and groundedness. And then there are specific situations for some people that cause anxiety. So for some people, maybe if, anxiety can be on such a range because some of it is how a person is born and some of it is environmental factors, like maybe the family or the environment or the school or the peer interactions. All of those combined with temperament can influence a person's experience with anxiety. I did a lot of talking. Any questions or comments, Sammy, that we want to address right now?
No, I haven't seen anything come through on the chat, Amy. We're good.
Okay.
Unless people chime in right now.
Okay, well, we'll move to the next one. Oh, now the other thing about, so what can kind of combat anxiety, which is kind of a bridge between these two slides, really is building resilience. And we'll come back to that. So the next thing that I think, I hear this a lot from people, is wondering, when should I encourage my tweener teen, or as a tweener teen, or as a friend of a tweener teen, when should I encourage this person struggling with anxiety to seek professional help, and when should I encourage them to manage it on their own, or should I just show up as a friend? I am the kind of therapist who believes that therapy is helpful for some people, but not for everybody. But research shows that the quality of the relationship between a client and a therapist is what's really valuable. So, in those sort of in between cases, I think a lot of it is the person struggling with anxiety interested in pursuing therapy as a way of managing anxiety, because there are other things too that can be useful. So I think it depends on how much a person is struggling and how quickly they want to recover and how willing they are to make changes, or at least find a supportive professional who would be there as they think about making changes. So, a mental health or qualified medical professional is necessary to formally diagnose anxiety. And like I mentioned before, there's a lot of different kinds of anxiety, and so a mental health professional will be able to figure out what type of anxiety the person is experiencing and make a diagnosis that then will inform the type of treatment that could be the most effective and efficient. So basically, if someone is struggling with anxiety for a long period, or if it is so painful that it's interfering with a person's functioning, so in tweens and teens, this can look like decline in schoolwork, sudden change in enjoyment of activities. If it's something more like panic, I think there's a lot of great tools that therapists can help clients with pretty quickly. So that's where I think it depends on. But if it's impacting the person's functioning for a prolonged period of time, it's important to get professional help. One thing I wanted to say too, I think we're all clear on this, but just to make sure, is that this is not therapy, this session here, but I am able to connect you with more information and more resources. So yeah, when it gets in the way of someone's daily life, that's when professional help could be beneficial. So the next slide is about, I'm not quite there yet. I feel anxious sometimes, but I'm doing okay. One thing that can really help is finding any kind of regular exercise. It could be anything from dancing in your room to walking outside to, I like to sprint on my treadmill. I don't know why, but that really helps me just because I think I can get a lot of energy going sometimes. Monitor nutrition. That can be a little bit tricky if you're a parent or grandparent of a tween or teen, just because their caloric needs change so much in this time, and you want to model a healthy relationship with food and with your body. And if you can model regular exercise, that can help too. You can offer to do things with your tween or teen. And I have to say, I can't see people, so I'm not sure how many tweens and teens are here versus support people. So trying to use these words interchangeably. But anything you can do to try to get regular exercise or to model that as an adult is really valuable. If there are things about your social support, tween or teen, that are difficult, or as a parent or loved one, if there are things that you're relying on your tween or teen to fill, like modeling a healthy social support network for yourself, separate from your tween or teen, can be really useful, because it also takes some pressure off tweens or teens that feel like they need to take tweens or teens, that very often can be really sensitive to other people's needs. So anytime you can model sort of this healthy living in a variety of aspects, that can be actually very relieving to tweens and teens, as long as you also are available for them. Increase self-compassion. I had a funny story that I thought related to this. So yesterday I tried to give blood, and one thing that I model in my house is I try to really embrace accepting imperfection because I find that to be very helpful myself. So I went to give blood, and I've given blood like every 6 months for a little while, and my hemoglobin was too low by 1 point. So I came right home. I said, "Hey guys, I didn't give blood. My blood was unacceptable." And one of my kids said, "What are they expecting? Perfection?" And so I think at any time we can tell ourselves that, like, what am I expecting? Perfection, and lower the stakes. I think that's really important, especially if you think of all the tasks that teens or tweens are accomplishing right now, just as far as their own growth, and then what they're expected to do in school and how rapidly their brain is developing and changing. Anything we can do to model, like, we're not expecting perfection, is really useful. And modeling that, like showing that in our own lives, and creating a culture of that in our homes is really a powerful antidote to anxiety. Also creative outlets like listening to music, making art, taking a break, watching cat videos for a long time, even if you are not impressed with that as an adult, letting teens and tweens do that, or even watching with them if they're open to it, can be really useful without any expectations. Just taking those kind of breaks. Laughing, learning something new, improving your spiritual health. Sometimes some of this anxiety this is why I love that Messiah is doing this. Some types of anxiety can come from big questions that tweens or teens are thinking about, like what happens when we die, or what happened. I think that's a big one. And so, or what is the point of life? These are big questions, and being okay asking them and supporting tweens and teens and exploring them can be a really exciting time for them, and I think it can be really empowering to them. We don't need to be afraid of it if we are a loved one or a support person for them. Really encouraging them to explore big ideas can be really useful, or sort of those spiritual or existential questions. They're not too young for that. Whenever they come up, it's okay. And you don't have to know the answers. You just have to be with them while they explore. Meditating with or without an app. I found a great list of apps that I think can be really useful for some coping skills and building resilience. There's even one called COVID Coach, if this anxiety is related to COVID. There's one called Sleep Coach that can be
there already.
pretty useful. So those are some options. Spending time in nature is shown to be really useful. And even actually, if someone is actively anxious, getting out in the cold for a little bit, like just a little bit, can kind of reset our bodies. If physiological response, physical, if things that are physical help that person manage anxiety, that can be a good one. Christy has the sleep story. She suggested a sleep stories app. Great. Yes, and not everything's going to work for everyone. I listened to this sleep story app, and I couldn't fall asleep because I'm kind of an auditory learner, and so I was just listening to the story. So knowing, trial and error, trying something long enough to see if it's going to work, but then being willing to change it if it's not working. Yeah. And then talk to a trusted adult. I think one part that's hard for me as a parent, and this can be hard, especially for the parents of tweens or the parents who are really close to their teens, if their tween or teen wants to talk to a different adult, and that's okay. So kind of accepting what your role is, but being willing to step into the role that's there for you, and knowing that you would like to continue to be as open as possible to your tween or teen. Because part of your job, tweens and teens, is to separate from your parents. And all of this happens for each person so individually. and on such different timetables. And so I think that's another thing that I really want to emphasize is that really trying to see the person with anxiety for who they are and what's useful for them, and trying to see your relationship with them. So not so much of what should I do, what's the right thing to do, but what are some options that work for this person? How can I see this person for who they are, and where they're at? For example, my kids, I have kids who aren't, they're kind of homebodies, and they're not all that into adventure right now, even going to camp or things like that. And there's a part of me that really wants them to go to camp because that's what you should do. But, but then when I take them for who they are, I think they're doing great. They just like to be home more. They like to go out, but not, they like to be home. So, really figuring out, and I think in our where we live right now can be a little bit tough with that. I think that most of the boys I know are in hockey, for example, or different organized sports, and so like my boys don't really like organized sports. So accepting kind of who your loved one is and what they need, and that it might be really different from what you would need or what you would want, or what it seems like most kids need or want, because that's kind of a myth that gets in our way. And I think that one really can contribute to anxiety. We'll take a break, see if there's any questions or comments related to this. Yeah, Calm app is great though. I will say Calm app is great, even though like the sleep stories don't work for me. There's a lot of things on there that are fantastic. And anything that you can do, even if your teen or tween doesn't want to do it, if you do it for yourself, that makes a huge difference. So both, and offer it to them, but also use it for yourself. Yeah. Another thing I was going to say that, we'll move to the next slide, and then, okay, so if you've tried all these things and you're like, you know what, I'm ready to find a therapist. It is hard to find a therapist right now. But it's not impossible. You just need tenacity and keep trying. Psychology Today, a lot of therapists are on Psychology Today. I think it is a good place to start. There are different types of therapists. So like, there's marriage and family therapists, there's psychologists, there's licensed clinical social workers, there's people who are not quite licensed yet. For example, in the marriage and family therapy world, they might be a licensed associate marriage and family therapist. What really matters above all is the quality of relationship that they can build with the person who is seeking therapy with the client. So I don't know that it's too, unless you have family dynamics. If family dynamics contribute largely, it may be worth seeing someone who specializes in marriage and family therapy, unless there's someone with a different license who later developed an interest and competency in that area. I think it's what really matters is how you feel when and how the progress is going with the professional helper. Asking friends and family members can be a really useful way. Some people do like BetterHelp. It's kind of a texting therapy. I personally, I recommended sort of a 3-time rule. So for clients that I worked with, let's try it for 3 times. Let's see. Remember that therapists don't know your family, your loved one. They don't know you before you start. So one thing that I think is really useful to keep in mind is to have a therapist that's willing to build a relationship as you go. I know sometimes when I go to doctors, I'm like, oh, I don't know. I forget all my questions, or I don't always ask them things that I would really like to ask them. I think therapists are a little bit unique in a way that, because they spend more time with patients and clients than a lot of other medical professionals, or healthcare professionals, that I really want to encourage you to ask those questions as you go, or if something's useful or not useful. It's really helpful for many therapists to know those kinds of things, so that they can help you. But be ready to work with someone. Some therapy sessions are brief, which are 6 to 8 sessions, and some people work with therapists longer term. So to figure out if there's a therapist that you feel like you have a good relationship with, that's really, really important. It's more important than the actual type of therapy that they do, is what research shows. We'll move to the next slide. So sometimes teens and tweens, or maybe adults, wonder what happens in therapy. So every therapist is different. And there's a lot of different kinds of trainings therapists can have. So ask the therapist as you're sort of interviewing or getting to know them. And I see there's a question. I'll take a look at it in a minute. But remember that therapists really want to help you. So there is not a therapist out there who didn't sign up to be a therapist because they care about helping people through things. So therapists might also help you identify the source of anxiety. Sometimes, as loved ones caring for someone with anxiety, we can think we know what it is. And it could be that that's actually blinding us from finding other more relevant sources of anxiety. And so sort of a neutral party could be useful for that. And then what therapists will do is they make a treatment plan. Sometimes people know about it, sometimes they don't. But therapists are good therapists thinking of a treatment plan, like how can I help this person and how will I know that progress is being made? And then monitoring progress. So if it ever feels like you're in therapy and you're not making progress, I think that's a really valuable conversation to have with the therapist in a kind and respectful way. But to say, I was expecting this, and what I'm seeing is that, help me understand, why that is. And then you can kind of evaluate, clients and families can kind of evaluate if this is going to work or not, if this is useful. So, and progress can take time and investment. So I think one of the hardest parts about going to therapy, there's some things that, I think teens and tweens are really good at going to therapy because they're used to going to school and, kind of doing assignments and learning things in a way that working with adults is different. But in some ways, I think it's really important to remember that therapy is the kind of thing that what you put in is oftentimes what you get out. So the more sort of willing someone is to really take a look at things or try new thoughts on, which is hard to do, the more beneficial therapy will be.
Amy, I'm going to ask you to take a look at that anonymous question.
Yeah.
Because it talks about some next steps like medications.
Yes.
So I'm gonna let you just take a read at that.
Look at the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, it just went to you and I. But I think that it's a really important question about when to pursue drugs and medicine as part of therapy.
Yes. So therapists will help you work on that. A lot of times, one of the unless it's sort of a real mental health emergency where the person is just not functioning regularly, a lot of times people have their own thoughts about medications, and it's really important to take those into account. Medication can be a really valuable component, and I've had clients say, I wish I had taken medication sooner because that is the piece that was really missing for me. Then there are other clients who are like, I'm really opposed to medication, and I would rather use some alternative methods. And I think that can be valuable. It's important to recognize that in those cases, people are probably going to need to put in more effort and more investment of time and energy, because medication can speed up some improvements. The other thing about medication is some people's anxiety can be more chemically oriented, sort of brain chemistry. And so that's another time where medication can be really useful. And other times anxiety may be more about adjustment to big changes going on, or grief. And it may, if the person is functioning just also feeling anxious, but they're opposed to medication, that may be a time that's more where therapy is more useful than medication. But the gold standard is therapy and medication together. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And the question is, how young is too young, or is there a too young of an age? Like, are teens and tweens the right age to start a medication, or a little more intensive treatment?
Yeah, I have had teens and tweens, like I've worked with teens and tweens who are begging their parents to let them try medication, and it is indicated. I think if there's ever a fear, I think a psychiatrist is a good person to talk to about it. And I have had a lot of clients have this fear that a psychiatrist is going to make you take a medication. Nobody's going to make you take a medication. They're going to prescribe it to you. If you take it or not, nobody's going to know. So I think taking a teen or tween who's experiencing anxiety and expressing an interest in finding ways to manage it is something that is to be supported and explored. Now, if it goes against sort of family values, that's something to talk about, and I'll give you a model for how to talk about that. But this is an age where teens and tweens are branching off. So they are developing their own value systems. And if you can look at it as an adventure and not a scary adventure, it can be really cool to see that happen. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide here. I really like this one. And we were talking about this tomorrow in our small group. If anybody's interested. It's just a framework by that woman I talked about, Michelle Icard, who's written a lot of books about teens and tweens, but she's focuses particularly on tweens. But if you need to talk about your anxiety, or if you notice a loved one having anxiety, here's a little framework. Begin peacefully. So instead of like, what is going on? You can say, hey, let's go on a walk, or let's have a snack, or let's drive, while we're driving, let's talk about this, whatever. I noticed that things have been kind of tough for you lately. Want to talk about it? When would you like to talk about it? That can be good too, giving some of those, setting it up for a peaceful conversation. So giving some choice around when. Teens and tweens are really good at multitasking, so doing two things at once, like even when you're driving in the car going somewhere. Also, teens and tweens know that there's a beginning and an end to that, so it's not going to go on forever. Having a snack and doing it, setting a time limit, all those things can be peaceful starts. And make sure that you really are feeling as peaceful as you can about a difficult topic. Sometimes I write a Word document if I'm going to have a difficult one, like, this is how I want to feel going into it and coming out of it. Usually I say like collected, kind and gentle, whatever. Relate to your child or friend. I had a period of my life where I just didn't feel like I belonged. And so in that way, like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. Just a little snippet about, and I'm kind of wondering if that's what's going on for you. And then you can move into the interview. What is going on? Okay. And then it is surprising how hard this is to do with your own loved ones. Just echo back what you hear. Don't insert anything new. Just echo back what you hear. That is actually the most useful. And if you think about it, it's very energy saving. You do not have to be creative in this step. Just like, yeah, so if the teen or tween says, I just feel like I just don't belong with my friends anymore, or I keep going to hockey practice and I don't like hockey, and so you would say back, so it sounds like your friends, you're feeling like you don't belong with that group of friends, and you're wondering if you want to play hockey anymore. And keep it brief. Um, and then give some feedback. So, like it's looked like you've been struggling with this for a little while. It looks like maybe hockey, you know, I'm hearing that hockey's not your favorite anymore. I'm hearing that your friends seem to be interested in different things than you. And I just want you to know that that's okay. I will support you through figuring out how to do that. So I really like that framework for any of these difficult conversations. A framework can feel maybe a little stilted in some ways, but if you heard me, I think it sounded pretty natural. Just make sure you cover all your bases and that you don't kind of get long-winded, because you will lose teens and tweens that way. So that's the model. And then for you teens and tweens, when you're thinking about someone that you want to talk to about your anxiety, acknowledge how scary it is, but that it'll help you in the long run. Choose a time where you're comfortable. It doesn't have to be an emergency. If you're experiencing anything beyond, the scope of what I'm talking about here, happy to talk later about it or answer private messages. But it's okay to also just find find some company or distract if your anxiety is really overwhelming. But then when you're ready to talk about it, choose a time where you're comfortable. If you're worried about being taken seriously, or if you just need some talking points, you can find a mental health screening tool, or you can write down, like, this is what's happening to me. And then you don't even have to remember what it is. You can look at your sheet that you wrote down or your tool that you used. You can find them on the internet. If you are more of a writer, that's okay. And loved ones, I want you to hear that too. If your teen or tween is sending you something in it, instead of talking, they're texting it or they're writing it to you, that's okay. That means that that's a more comfortable way for the teen or tween to tell you something that matters to them. And then teens and tweens, your job is not to protect your parents. So if you're like, I'm feeling anxious, but I don't want to overwhelm my parents, but I want them to help me and they would be a good person, ask them. They are working on building their social supports and finding ways to support you. So, and then teens or tweens, if you're like, I don't know why, but I just want to reach out to my aunt instead, or my teacher, that's okay. Reach out to an adult you trust, because your mental health is important. We'll go to the last slide. So what I want you to do is, because I think it's really helpful for me to always think about, what do I need in order to support my loved one going through anxiety, or in order to talk to loved ones about my anxiety. It's important for me to name things that I have within myself that will help me remember why I'm doing this, or find the courage to do it. So for me, courage is the first one. Remembering that it's normal. Mental health struggles with anxiety are very normal. It's brave to go to someone. It's brave to show up to someone and say, hey, are you doing okay? I noticed that. I wondered if you're feeling worried about this. Or I wonder if you're feeling worried. Loving. It is a loving thing to do, both to ask for help and give it. Self-compassionate, caring, cool, curious. You don't even have to know what it is. You can just be curious. It's attentive. It benefits the future you. So if you're like, I don't want to do this for me now, if you're like, I don't want to reach out, on either side of that, it's going to benefit the future you or the future relationship. To do it in a way that is kind and gentle and curious and not forcing. It's doing it different. If mental health and anxiety has not been talked about openly, doing it different is a big deal. But important. And it's helpful. It's helpful to your relationship, both to go to someone that you trust about something big, like feeling anxious a lot, and it's also helpful to go to a person that you see struggling. So that is the presentation. If there's any other words, I encourage you to write them down. But